Have you ever looked around at the incredible variety of life on Earth? I mean, from the tiniest microbe to the tallest redwood or, a majestic whale to a busy ant colony, and just wondered, how did all this happen? How did we as humans come to be?
It's a huge question. And for centuries, thinkers and scientists have been grappling with it. The story of how our understanding of life's changes has itself evolved is really just as fascinating as the process of evolution.
It truly is. So today we're taking a deep dive into the major theories of evolution. We're going to explore how our understanding has transformed over time, from those very first bold ideas all the way to the cutting-edge debates happening right now.
Exactly. Our mission is basically to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the surprising facts from these scientific journeys.
We want to help you connect the dots, see the bigger picture, and feel truly well-informed. So what were those initial groundbreaking attempts to explain life's changes?
And how did one really famous voyage totally reshape scientific thought?
Yeah, and what are the biggest questions scientists are still wrestling with today? Let's unpack this.
Okay, so our journey really kicks off around 1809 with Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and his pretty influential book, Philosophie zoologique.
Right. And it's important to remember the context, isn't it? The world Lamarck lived in.
Oh, absolutely. Society was, well, deeply rooted in biblical explanations for life. So for him to come along and propose that species could actually change over time, that was revolutionary.
A truly radical concept for his era. He was really pushing the boundaries.
Definitely. Lamarck's central idea, the one we often hear about, is the inheritance of acquired characteristics.
So what did that actually mean?
Well, he basically proposed that individuals could develop new traits during their lifetime, maybe in response to their environment or their needs, almost like they had a will or desire to adapt.
A desire to adapt.
And here's the key part. He believed these new traits, the ones acquired during a lifetime, were then passed down to their children, became part of heredity.
Does that idea resonate with you at first glance? Thinking about it now.
Well, it's kind of intuitive, isn't it? You think, if I work out, get really strong, maybe my kids will inherit some of that strength.
Yeah, I can see the appeal.
Lamarck believed organs used more would get stronger, and those not used would, fade away. He thought this constant push to adapt would lead to species gradually improving, becoming more complex over time.
He used some classic examples to illustrate this, didn't he? The giraffe is probably the most famous one.
Right. Lamarck suggested that ancient giraffes stretched their necks, constantly reaching for higher leaves. And over generations, this stretching led to longer necks, which were then inherited by their offspring.
Makes a sort of simple sense. And snakes.
Similar idea. He believed as snakes started crawling more and stopped using their limbs, those legs just gradually degenerated, eventually disappearing over generations because of disuse.
And duck's feet.
He thought land birds, finding themselves in wet areas, maybe stretched their toes to navigate better, paddling. And this led to webbed feet, which then became a permanent inherited feature.
Now, obviously this sounds a bit, simplistic to us today with what we know about genetics, but Lamarck's theory was apparently an instant hit back then.
It really was. It was the first sort of comprehensive explanation for things like vestigial organs, like our appendix or those tiny tailbones we have.
So his theory suggested they just faded from disuse.
Exactly. So he was seen as quite the visionary, providing this early, ambitious theory of evolution.
But the criticisms didn't take long to surface, did they?
No, they didn't. I mean, the idea that pure desire could create organs, well, that didn't really hold up.
Yeah.
Humans can't just wish for wings and suddenly be able to fly, right?
Well, a bit of a flaw there.
And his belief that evolution was always this linear march towards perfection that didn't quite fit with what scientists were observing in nature either. It seemed more random.
Plus, the use and disuse idea itself had problems. You mentioned the heart earlier. It works tirelessly, but it doesn't become the largest organ.
Exactly. And sadly, for some of us, developing six-pack abs in your lifetime doesn't mean your children are born with them.
Shame that. And the big question remained, how exactly were these traits supposed to be passed on? Lamarck couldn't really explain the mechanism.
No, he couldn't. And there was that famous experiment by August Weismann later on. He cut the tails off mice for something like 22 generations.
And the offspring.
Still born with normal tails.
Yeah.
Pretty strong evidence against inheriting those kinds of acquired changes.
Darwin himself also pointed out a major issue, didn't he? With variation.
Yeah, Darwin argued that if acquired traits were inherited, then wouldn't all individuals in a species eventually end up looking exactly the same? because it'll acquire the best traits over time.
But that's not what we see.
No, what we see everywhere in nature is variation, differences within species.
Okay, so Lamarckism faced some serious challenges. But it's interesting, you mentioned neo-Lamarckism. The idea isn't completely dead.
It's fascinating, yeah. Despite those strong criticisms, there's been a sort of modern resurgence of interest, looking back at its core ideas, sometimes called neo-Lamarckism.
Like with the rhino horns?
Exactly. There are some studies suggesting that, because forest officers started cutting rhino horns to deter poaching, there's been a noticeable increase in rhinos being born without horns. It gives them a survival advantage, obviously.
Huh, and elephants too.
Similar thing observed there. With elephants being heavily hunted for their tusks, we're seeing more and more elephants born tuskless in certain populations.
So it's not conscious desire, but
Right. But it does show how an environmental pressure can seemingly influence inherited physical traits over generations. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
it really does. Were there kernels of truth in Lamarck's original ideas, perhaps? Maybe working through mechanisms he couldn't have known about, like epigenetics or something?
It's an active area of discussion, definitely. Food for thought.
Okay, let's shift gears then to the next giant of evolutionary thought, Charles Darwin.
A big one.
Yeah. His transformative experience, everyone knows about it, was the 5-year HMS Beagle voyage, right? 1831 to 1836.
Absolutely. He meticulously explored South America, Africa, Australia,
hmm
just gathering this incredible mountain of evidence, observations, specimens.
And when he finally published On the Origin of Species in 1859, it changed everything, though apparently he was surprised it hadn't been figured out sooner.
Yeah, he felt the idea was quite simple in essence. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and maybe a bit awkward for Darwin.
Ooh, what happened?
Well, while Darwin was painstakingly working on his theory for years, another naturalist, Alfred Wallace, was out exploring in Malaysia.
Okay.
And Wallace independently came up with a remarkably similar theory of evolution by natural selection.
No way. At the same time.
Pretty much. Wallace actually sent Darwin his manuscript outlining the idea. Imagine receiving that.
Wow. That must have been a shock. Seeing your life's work, basically, described by someone else.
Exactly. Caused Darwin quite a bit of anxiety, apparently. So what happened was, encouraged by his friends, Darwin ended up presenting both his and Wallace's ideas to the scientific community.
Both together.
Yes, but Darwin's own, much more detailed work was presented first and got the primary attention.
It really highlights that human element in science, doesn't it? The competition, the timing, how credit gets assigned.
It really does. Makes you think about how often maybe similar ideas pop up independently when the scientific climate is right for them.
True. So, what were the key things influencing Darwin's own thinking? You mentioned pigeon breeding.
Right. He was fascinated by how breeders selected for specific traits,
Yeah.
fantails, particular colors, but he also noticed that even when breeders selected carefully, the offspring still had random variations.
So, not all traits were perfectly passed down. There was some randomness involved.
Exactly. That observation was crucial. And another massive influence was Thomas Malthus and his theory of population.
Ah, Malthus. The idea that populations grow faster than resources.
Precisely. Malthus argued populations tend to grow geometrically, like 2, 4, 8, 16, while food supplies, resources go arithmetically 2, 4, 6, 8.
Leading to an imbalance.
Yes. An inevitable struggle for existence, as Malthus put it, with natural checks like disease or famine keeping populations in check. This idea of a constant struggle deeply shaped Darwin's thinking about competition in nature.
Okay, so that brings us to Darwin's core theory. Evolution by natural selection. And the crucial difference from Lamarck is...
The starting point. Darwin proposed that variations already exist naturally within any species. It's not about acquiring them through effort or desire during a lifetime.
Got it. The variation is just there.
Exactly. And then nature selects or, favors those individuals who happen to already possess variations that give them some kind of advantage in their specific environment.
An edge for survival or reproduction.
Right. These individuals are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those advantageous traits on to the next generation.
So let's revisit the giraffe example through Darwin's eyes.
Okay. Darwin's view would be, within the ancient giraffe population, there was already natural variation in neck length. Some had slightly shorter necks, some slightly longer.
Just random variation.
Yes. Then, maybe the environment changed, trees grew taller. Those giraffes that already happened to have slightly longer necks had an advantage. They could reach the food better.
So they ate better, were healthier.
and reproduced more successfully, passing on their longer neck genes. Meanwhile, the shorter neck giraffes struggled, had fewer offspring, and over many, many generations, the average neck length of the population gradually increased.
Makes sense. A process of selection acting on existing variation.
Precisely. Darwin laid out 5 key ideas, really. First, the universal occurrence of variation differences are just inherent in every group of living things.
Okay, variation is step 1.
Step 2, drawing from Malthus, was the excessive natural rate of multiplication. Species tend to produce way more offspring than can possibly survive.
Leads to competition.
Which is step 3, the struggle for existence. Individuals have to compete for limited resources, food, mates, space, everything.
And in that struggle
comes step 4, survival of the fittest.
Ugh.
Although, fun fact, that phrase was actually coined by Herbert Spencer, not Darwin himself.
Ah, interesting. But the idea is Darwin's.
The core idea, yes, that in this struggle, only those individuals best adapted or fit for their environment tend to survive and reproduce. The unfit are eliminated.
And finally, step 5.
The inheritance of traits. Those survivors pass on their advantageous characteristics to the next generation. But, like Lamarck, Darwin faced a challenge. How are these traits actually inherited?
Right, the mechanism was missing. He came up with the pangenesis theory, didn't he?
He did. It was his attempt to explain it. The idea was that every part of the body, every organ, secreted these tiny particles called gemmules.
Gemmules?
Yeah, gemmules. These supposedly traveled through the bloodstream, collected in the reproductive organs, and carried information about the body part they came from. Then they were passed on to the offspring.
Wow, that's intricate.
It was an ingenious guess, really, given that nobody understood genetics back then. We now know it's incorrect, of course, but it shows how hard he was trying to fill that knowledge gap.
Okay, so Darwin's theory was powerful, but let's talk criticisms. First off, as you said, he observed variation, but couldn't explain how it actually arose.
Right. He didn't know about genetic mutations, or genetic drift, or gene flow, all the things modern genetics later uncovered as the actual sources of that variation. It was a black box for him.
And the Malthus connection?
Well, while Malthus's idea was influential, applying it rigidly isn't always accurate, especially for humans. Resource distribution, not just absolute scarcity, often plays a massive role in who thrives or struggles. And of course, his pangenesis theory was just wrong, completely superseded by genetics.
But maybe the biggest issue, or at least the one with the most significant social impact, was the misinterpretation of survival of the fittest, particularly when applied to human societies.
Oh, absolutely. That phrase got seriously misunderstood and misused. It's often taken to mean only physical strength matters for survival.
Which isn't true for humans.
Not at all. In humans, survival and passing on your genes depends on so much more: social support, intelligence, access to resources, culture, medical care, even just plain luck sometimes.
Like someone with a physical disability might thrive because of strong family support or access to technology.
Exactly. Or think about a pandemic like COVID-19 survival, often depended more on access to healthcare or the ability to isolate than just inherent physical fitness.
And this misinterpretation had some really dark consequences, didn't it?
Sadly, yes. The idea was twisted to justify social inequalities, racism, colonialism, basically arguing that some groups were naturally superior and destined to dominate others. It became a pseudoscientific basis for some terrible ideologies.
A stark reminder of how scientific ideas can be taken out of context and misused. How do you think understanding these critiques changes your perception of Darwin's widely accepted ideas?
It adds crucial nuance, I think. It doesn't necessarily negate the core scientific validity of natural selection, but it highlights its limitations, especially when applied simplistically to complex human societies, and it forces us to confront the historical baggage associated with some of these concepts.
Okay, so after Darwin, the big glaring question mark hanging over everything was heredity. How did traits actually get passed down?
That became the central challenge. Both Lamarck and Darwin had stumbled there. Luckily, the era after Darwinism started providing some answers. August Weismann, building on some earlier ideas, came up with his germplasm theory.
Germplasm. Okay, break that down.
Weismann made a crucial distinction. He proposed that organisms have 2 fundamentally different types of plasma or cells. You've got the somatoplasm. These are basically all the regular body cells making up your muscles, skin, organs, etc. They are mortal. They die with the individual.
Okay, body cells. And the other type?
The germplasm. These are the reproductive cells, sperm and eggs. He argued these are potentially immortal, passed down continuously from generation to generation.
And the big insight was?
That change is happening to the somatoplasm like a giraffe stretching its neck or Weismann cutting off those mouse tails are not inherited. Only changes that somehow affect the germplasm, the reproductive cells themselves, could be passed on to offspring.
Ah, so that directly contradicted Lamarck's idea of inheriting acquired characteristics.
Exactly. It was a massive step forward in understanding heredity
Mm.
and really put a nail in the coffin for classical Lamarckism.
And this thinking paved the way for what we consider the most advanced theory today, right? The synthetic theory of evolution or the modern synthesis.
That's the one. This is where things really started to click together in the 20th century.
Because it combined Darwin's big idea
With the rediscovery and development of genetics. Primarily, Gregor Mendel's work with pea plants, which finally revealed the basic laws of inheritance, how traits are passed down through discrete units, what we now call genes.
Mendel, right. His work was lost for a while, wasn't it?
It was, then rediscovered. And then you had the field of population genetics developing, with researchers figuring out how gene frequencies change in populations over time, the role of mutation, genetic drift, and so on.
So the modern synthesis basically integrated Darwin's natural selection with Mendelian genetics and population genetics.
Precisely. It provided the mechanism that Darwin was missing. Genetics explained where variation comes from, mutations, recombination, and how traits are inherited.
So, in simple terms, how does the modern synthesis see evolution happening? Like a flowchart.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. First, you get variation created within a population through genetic mutations, gene flow between populations, random genetic drift, recombination during sexual reproduction.
Okay, step one, create differences.
Step 2. Natural selection acts on these variations. The environment favors certain combinations of genes, genotypes, over others.
Survival and reproduction of the fittest, genetically speaking.
Kind of, yeah. Step 3. This leads to changes in the gene frequencies over time, creating distinct populations that are genetically different.
And step four,
If these distinct populations become reproductively isolated from each other, meaning they can no longer interbreed successfully for a long enough period.
they can become different species.
Exactly, that's speciation. So the synthesis provides this comprehensive framework, linking genetics, variation, selection, and the formation of new species. Can you see how genetics really filled in those crucial missing pieces that Darwin couldn't explain?
Absolutely. It provided the how. But even this modern synthesis isn't the final word, right? There are still critiques and ongoing debates.
Oh, for sure. Science never really reaches a final word. One major critique is that the synthetic theory kind of starts midway.
What do you mean?
Well, it's great at explaining how existing life changes, but it doesn't really explain the origin of life itself. How did the very first living cells arise from non-living matter? Or how did incredibly complex organs, like the eye or the human brain, develop from simpler precursors? It often takes their initial existence as a given.
Okay. That's a big gap. What else?
Some argue there's an overemphasis on natural selection as the sole driver. It sometimes struggles to convincingly explain traits that don't seem to offer any obvious survival or reproductive advantage. Maybe some features driven by sexual selection, or just random genetic quirks.
And the fossil record issue, the missing links.
That's another point of contention. If evolution, driven by the mechanisms of the synthesis, were always a slow, gradual accumulation of tiny changes, you'd expect to find a more continuous fossil record, showing those smooth transitions between species.
Oh, we often don't find them clearly.
Right. The fossil record often shows species appearing relatively suddenly, persisting for a long time with little change, and then disappearing or being replaced. This lack of clear, missing links between major groups leads some scientists to question the purely gradualist view implied by the synthesis. What are some missing links in your own understanding of how life evolved, things that still seem puzzling?
That's a good question to ponder. Okay, let's maybe dive a bit deeper into some of these core concepts and debates that arise from this modern understanding. First up, reproductive isolation. You mentioned it's key for new species forming.
Absolutely essential. It's basically any mechanism that prevents individuals from two different populations from successfully interbreeding and producing fertile offspring. It stops the gene flow between them.
So what kinds of barriers are we talking about?
There are lots. You can have geographical isolation, which is maybe the easiest to picture: a mountain range, an ocean, a canyon separating populations, like the squirrels on opposite rims of the Grand Canyon.
You can't physically meet.
Exactly. But then you have other barriers, even if populations live in the same area. Temporal isolation, maybe they breed at different times of the year, different times of day.
Like one frog species breeding in spring, another in late summer.
Right. Or mechanical isolation. Their reproductive organs might just be incompatible, maybe due to size differences. And even if mating occurs, you might get gametic isolation, where the sperm can't fertilize the egg, perhaps due to chemical incompatibility.
And sometimes fertilization does happen, but problems arise later.
Yes, those are called postzygotic barriers. You could have hybrid inviability, where the hybrid offspring develops but is weak and dies before it can reproduce. Or the classic example, hybrid sterility.
Like the mule.
Exactly. A mule is a hybrid of a horse and a donkey. It's a perfectly viable animal, often very strong, but it's sterile. It can't produce its own offspring. This keeps the horse and donkey gene pools separate.
So when any of these isolation mechanisms persist for long enough,
The separated populations accumulate enough genetic differences through mutation, drift, and selection tailored to their specific environments that they eventually become distinct species. That whole process is speciation.
got it. Okay, next big debate. The speed of evolution. You mentioned gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium.
Right. This is a really interesting one. Gradualism, which is Darwin's view, and is central to the standard interpretation of the modern synthesis, proposes that evolutionary change happens slowly, steadily, consistently, over vast stretches of geological time.
Like tiny genetic changes just accumulating bit by bit, eventually leading to new species.
Exactly. It's seen as directional, incremental. Supporters point to evidence like some fossil lineages that do seem to show very slow, continuous change over millions of years. The evolution of horses is a classic example, often cited.
Okay, slow and steady. What's the alternative?
Punctuated equilibrium, an idea most famously developed by Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge. They looked at the fossil record and said, hang on, we don't always see slow, steady change.
What do we see?
They argued that the record is actually characterized by long periods of stasis, where species seem to remain relatively unchanged for millions of years, punctuated by relatively brief, geologically speaking, bursts of rapid evolutionary change, where new species appear quite suddenly.
So long periods of calm, then short bursts of intense change.
That's the idea. The main evidence they point to is exactly those missing links we talked about. The frequent lack of clear intermediate fossil forms between related species suggests to them that the transitions happen too quickly in smaller, isolated populations to be commonly preserved as fossils.
And the Cambrian explosion.
That's often cited as a prime example of punctuation on a grand scale. Around 540 million years ago, you see this sudden dramatic appearance of a huge diversity of complex animal body plans in the fossil record, with relatively few clear ancestors in older rocks. It looks like a major burst of evolutionary innovation.
So which view is right? Slow crawl or rapid bursts?
Well, like many debates in science, the reality is probably complex. It's not necessarily an either-or situation. It's possible that both modes of evolution occur. Maybe some lineages evolve gradually, while others experience periods of stasis followed by rapid change, perhaps triggered by major environmental shifts or genetic innovations. What makes more sense to you? Do you lean towards one or think both could happen?
I can see arguments for both. It probably depends on the circumstances. This ties into the scale of evolution too, right? Micro versus macro evolution.
Exactly. Microevolution refers to those smaller scale evolutionary changes that happen within a population or below the species level. Changes in gene frequencies, adaptations to local environments.
Things we can often observe directly over shorter timescales.
Right, like bacteria developing antibiotic resistance in a matter of years or decades. Or those peppered moths in England, changing color frequency depending on industrial pollution levels. These are observable, recordable changes in gene pools.
Okay, that's micro, so macro is.
Macroevolution refers to the large-scale evolutionary patterns and changes that happen at or above the species level over long geological periods.
Like the origin of entirely new groups of organisms.
Yes. Speciation itself is often considered macroevolutionary. Also, the origin of major new evolutionary innovations or body plans like the evolution of feathers in dinosaurs leading to birds, or the development of jaws in early fish, or even large-scale extinction events.
Things we typically study through the fossil record and comparing different species.
Exactly. Now, the big question is how micro and macro are related.
Is macro just a whole lot of micro added up over time?
That's the traditional gradualist view, inherent in the modern synthesis. Macroevolution is essentially the cumulative result of microevolutionary processes, mutation, selection, drift, acting over vast timescales. The difference is just scale and time.
But the punctuated equilibrium folks might disagree.
They often do. They argue that macroevolution might be, to some extent, decoupled from microevolution, meaning the small, gradual changes happening within a population during periods of stasis, micro, might not be the main drivers of the large, rapid changes that lead to new species or major innovations, macro. They suggest other mechanisms might be more important for those big leaps.
Interesting. So the relationship between small changes and big changes is still debated. If macroevolution happens in bursts, what does that imply about the forces driving it?
That's the million-dollar question. Perhaps major environmental catastrophes, key genetic mutations with large effects, or developmental shifts play a bigger role in those rapid bursts than the slow accumulation of tiny advantages.
Okay, one more concept. Dallow's law sounds ominous.
Maybe a little. It's named after Louis Dallow, a paleontologist, and it basically states that evolution is irreversible.
Irreversible, meaning what?
Meaning that once a complex structure or function is lost during the evolution of a lineage, it cannot be regained in its exact original form, even if the environmental pressures that favored it return. Evolution is seen as a one-way street with no U-turns, essentially.
So if a species loses the ability to fly, like an ostrich or a penguin.
Dallow's law suggests they can't just re-evolve flight later on, even if it might become advantageous again. The genetic and developmental pathways are thought to become too degraded or repurposed over time.
Richard Dawkins had a take on this, didn't he?
Yeah, he framed it more in terms of probability. He called re-evolving a complex lost trait a statistical improbability. The chances of hitting upon the exact same complex sequence of genetic changes in reverse are just astronomically low. We evolved from four-legged ancestors to walk on two legs. We shouldn't expect to easily revert back to being quadrupedal.
Are there criticisms or exceptions to Dallow's law?
Well, it's generally considered more applicable over long evolutionary timescales and for really complex structures. There might be some wiggle room for simpler traits or over shorter microevolutionary timescales, like the peppered moths shifting back and forth in color frequency that looks like a kind of reversal, though it's simpler. But for complex things like wings or eyes, the law seems to hold up pretty well. Does the idea of irreversible evolution resonate with your intuition? Or do you think life always finds a way, even backwards?
It does feel intuitively right for complex things. It's hard to imagine re-evolving something intricate once it's gone. Okay, lastly, before we recap, we should touch on intelligent design. This comes up a lot as a critique of current evolutionary theory.
It does. It's important to understand it's primarily a philosophical argument, though its proponents often frame it in scientific terms. The core idea is that the sheer complexity of life, think of DNA, the intricate molecular machines inside our cells, complex organs like the eye, simply cannot have arisen purely through random processes like mutation and natural selection.
So the argument is that this complexity implies.
It implies some kind of underlying design or purpose, which for most proponents points towards an intelligent designer. They argue the natural world shows evidence of being fine-tuned in a way that seems unlikely to be purely accidental.
It has echoes of older ideas, maybe even Lamarck's internal wall.
Some people make that connection, yeah, to an internal drive or purpose behind evolution. It's a concept that's heavily debated, of course, within scientific and philosophical circles. Critics often see it as a non-scientific argument, essentially a God of the gaps explanation or a revival of religious creationism in a different guise.
It definitely sparks debate. When you look at the intricate details of life, all the complexity, what conclusion does your critical thinking lead you to? It's a question everyone has to grapple with, I suppose.
It is indeed.
All right, let's try to quickly recap this journey. We started way back with Lamarck and his intuitive but ultimately flawed idea of inheriting acquired characteristics, the giraffe stretching its neck.
Then we moved to Darwin and Wallace, with the revolutionary concept of natural selection acting on existing variation within populations, driven by the struggle for existence, the survival of the fittest.
But Darwin couldn't explain heredity.
Yeah.
That gap was filled later by the modern synthesis, which brilliantly combined Darwin's selection with Mendelian genetics and population genetics, giving us our current mainstream understanding.
Right. We talked about how that synthesis explains variation arising from mutation and recombination, being sorted by selection, leading to population changes, and through reproductive isolation, the formation of new speciation.
We also dug into some key concepts and debates like the different ways populations can become isolated, leading to speciation.
And the fascinating debate about the pace of evolution.
Yeah.
Is it always slow and gradual, or does it happen in rapid bursts, separated by long periods of stability, punctuated equilibrium?
Plus, the different scales, microevolution within species versus macroevolution, the big picture changes over geological time and how those two relate.
And finally, Darwin's law suggesting evolution doesn't backtrack easily, and the ongoing philosophical debate surrounding intelligent design versus naturalistic explanations for complexity.
Phew, that was quite a deep dive. What's maybe one surprising fact or concept that really stands out for you from all of this? Something you'll take away?
For me, it's often the sheer contingency implied by things like punctuated equilibrium or Darwin's law. History matters deeply in evolution. It's not necessarily a smooth climb to perfection, but a path shaped by chance events, past losses, and environmental shifts.
That's a great point. So, what does all this really mean for us? It seems the science of evolution is very much a living, evolving field itself.
Absolutely. It's packed with powerful explanations for the diversity of life we see. But it's also full of intriguing questions, ongoing debates, and areas where our understanding is still incomplete. It's a fantastic example of how scientific knowledge gets built, challenged, refined, and sometimes overturned over time.
Which leads to a final thought. Given these ongoing debates, the unanswered questions about, say, the origin of life itself, or how truly complex organs first developed, how might future scientific discoveries reshape our understanding even further? Could there be mechanisms or forces at play in evolution that we haven't even conceived of yet?
It's entirely possible. New fields, new technologies, new theoretical insights could reveal dimensions of evolution we currently don't grasp. That's the exciting part of science.
What else might be at play that we haven't considered? Definitely something to mull over. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.